70,000 years ago, our entire species almost disappeared. Not slowly, not over centuries. In what was probably a single generation, the human population dropped to somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 people total on the entire planet. For context, that's fewer than a small town high school football game. Every single human alive today, all 8 billion of us, may trace back to that tiny group of survivors. And most people have never heard this story. So let's rewind. About 74,000 years ago, on the island of Sumatra in modern-day Indonesia, a volcano called Toba erupted. But calling it an eruption doesn't really capture it. This wasn't Mount Vesuvius, this wasn't Mount St. Helens. Toba was what geologists call a supervolcanic eruption, the kind that happens maybe once every 100,000 years. It ejected roughly 2,800 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere. To put that into perspective, Mount St. Helens in 1980 ejected about 1 cubic kilometer. Toba was nearly 3,000 times larger. The explosion left behind a crater so massive it's now the largest volcanic lake on Earth. You can see it on Google Maps. It's 100 kilometers long. But the eruption itself wasn't what almost killed us. It's what happened next. All that material, ash, sulfur dioxide, aerosols, got launched into the upper atmosphere and spread across the entire planet. Within weeks, a layer of ash up to 15 centimeters thick blanketed parts of South Asia. That's about 6 inches of volcanic dust covering everything: plants, water sources, shelter. But the real damage was in the sky. The sulfur dioxide reacted with water vapor to form sulfuric acid aerosols, tiny particles that reflected sunlight back into space before it could reach the ground. Global temperatures dropped. Estimates vary, but some models suggest an average cooling of 3 to 5 degrees Celsius for years. Some regions may have cooled off by as much as 15 degrees. That might not sound dramatic, but a 3-degree global drop is enormous. The last ice age was only about 6 degrees cooler than today. So Toba potentially pushed the planet halfway to ice age conditions overnight in geological terms. This is what scientists call a volcanic winter. Sunlight dims, photosynthesis slows, plants die. The animals that eat those plants die. And the humans who eat those animals and plants are suddenly in very serious trouble. Now, here's where it gets personal. In the 1990s, geneticists studying human DNA noticed something strange. Compared to most species, humans have shockingly low genetic diversity. Chimpanzees, our closest relatives, have far more genetic variation than we do, even though there are 8 billion of us and only a few 100,000 of them. That's weird. Bigger populations should mean more diversity, but humans are oddly similar to each other. The explanation that emerged is called a population bottleneck. At some point in our past, the human population crashed so low that the gene pool shrank dramatically. And when the population eventually recovered, it grew back from that tiny surviving group, carrying only their limited genetic variation forward. It's like photocopying a photocopy. You lose information each time. The timing of this genetic bottleneck lines up suspiciously well with the Toba eruption. Some researchers, most notably Stanley Ambrose at the University of Illinois, proposed what became known as the Toba Catastrophe theory. The idea is straightforward. Toba erupted, the climate collapsed, food sources vanished, and the human population was decimated down to a few thousand breeding individuals scattered across likely Africa. Potentially as few as 1,000 people, standing between humanity and total extinction. Think about that for a second. 1,000 people. You could fit the entire future of the human race in a mid-sized concert venue. No agriculture, no written language, no cities, just small bands of hunter-gatherers trying to survive a world that had gone suddenly dark and cold. And they did survive. Obviously, you're watching this now. But how? How do 1,000 people make it through years of volcanic winter with stone tools and animal skins? This is where the story gets interesting, because the answer might be the most human thing imaginable. They cooperated. There's archaeological evidence from this period showing increased complexity in toolmaking, signs of trade between distant groups, and early hints of symbolic thinking, like ochre pigments used for body decoration. Some anthropologists believe the bottleneck itself may have accelerated human cognitive and social evolution. When survival depends on cooperation, the groups that communicate better, plan better, and share resources are the ones that make it. The pressure didn't just thin the population, it may have shaped who we became. Now, it's worth saying this theory has its critics, and the debate is real. Some climate scientists argue that cooling from Toba wasn't as severe as early models may have suggested. More recent studies put the temperature drop closer to 1 to 2 degrees, which is significant, but no apocalypse. Other researchers point out that human populations in some regions, particularly parts of Africa, may not have been as affected as those in Asia. And some geneticists argue the bottleneck might have happened slightly before or after Toba, meaning the volcano may not have been the direct cause. So the honest answer is we're not 100% sure Toba was the trigger, but something nearly wiped us out around that time. The genetic evidence for the bottleneck itself is strong. What's not debated is how close the margin was, a few thousand people on our entire planet for possibly thousands of years. Every war, every invention, every song, every building, every person you've ever known, all of it descends from that small, desperate group who figured out how to keep going. And here's the part that's hard to wrap your head around. If one more drought had hit, if one more disease had swept through, if one band of survivors had turned left instead of right, the human story could have ended before it even got started. No pyramids, no moon landing, no you watching this on your phone right now. Just another species that didn't make it, joining the 99.9% of all species that have ever lived and gone extinct. We think of humanity as inevitable. Like, of course we were going to be here. Of course we were going to build cities and split atoms and argue on the internet. But we weren't inevitable. We were lucky and stubborn and just cooperative enough to pull through the worst disaster our species has ever faced. That's the thing about being human. We're fragile and relentless at the same time. 70,000 years ago, a volcano tried to end the story. 1,000 people said no. And every single one of us is the proof. If this made you think, subscribe to my channel. I've got more stories about the weird, wild, and surprisingly close calls of what it's like being human. I'll see you then.